And so hopefully you are all in the right spot here for Megafires, Floods, and Fungi. And I am very honored to introduce Maya. Before I introduce Maya, for those that came in a little late, I can't see the chat. I don't know, Maya, did you enter in your little prompt? Wonderful. All right, so there's a prompt in the chat if you're able to include some information about what brought you here and where you're at. We would love that. And Maya, we were just talking before this call about how long we've known each other. When the committee was sitting together and we were talking about wildfire related class ideas, I remembered I saw one of Maya's workshops recently on Facebook and reached out. Maya and I worked together 14 years ago about at the first outdoor program I worked at. So it's been a while. Maya is a master's student at San Jose State University and a guest instructor at UC Santa Cruz, who explores the interplay among fire, fungi, and humans. As co-founder of Radical Mycology and founder of Mycopsychology Experiences, they foster connections with fungi for personal and planetary transformation. Maya has contributed to 4 studies on microbial inoculation for wildfire resilience with CoRenewal. They hold a BA in environmental studies from Evergreen State College. Welcome, Maya. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
All right. I just want to say hello, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Nicole. It's great to see you after so long. I think we both have had children since then, and lots of has changed in our lives, but it's just lovely to see a familiar face. And um, I'm really excited. I love the program that you all have. If I lived closer, I would totally take it. And I am so excited to hear that there's folks with some overlapping interests and backgrounds to me. Um, Laurel, can I ask you what how you study fungi? I'm gonna guess pathogenic fungi. Am I
Pathogenic
right?
specifically, you are, but specifically in creating wildlife habitat. I study
Oh, wow.
cavity nesting birds and like purple martins and nuthatches, and they obviously rely on wood decay pathways for their nest sites.
Oh, very cool. Wow. Awesome. I love that because like usually pathogenic fungi just get such a bad rap and people just talk about how to get rid of them and how to make them stop, and they are actually can be, obviously quite problematic, but they're also really important in terms of their ecological role. So that's really cool. Um, Great. And we've got a forester here. We've got an agricultural consultant with some experience doing working with fungi for remediation. That is really cool. Um, so yeah, I was, asking folks ahead of time, how much to focus on post-fire contaminants, and it sounds like that's something that folks are interested in. So I'll definitely make sure to cover that. I'm going to go ahead and share screen and make sure I've got the right thing pulled up. Oh, I'm getting a little preview of the slides.
And it looks like, Maya, you also have someone from one of our soil and water conservation districts. So your presentation is going to have quite the reach in a lot of our programs in the state of Oregon.
Fantastic. Awesome. I get really excited whenever there's fire people and soil people in the same space because they're inextricable and they're so deeply intertwined. So I'm really happy to see that. Um, so I can just share a little bit about myself. This is the land that I recently became a steward of just in August. So I'm a brand new baby land steward who's been learning how to tend wild spaces, mostly in Central California, but I also spent a good number of years up in Olympia, Washington. And this is a place you can kind of see it in the background of this picture that, has been tended, but also needs a lot of tending, and it's in the wildland urban interface and has pathogens like everywhere else that we're managing, has wildfire risk, and then it's also the site, one of my study sites for my thesis project, which looks at ways of working with fungi and other microbes, both in terms of biostimulation, which is creating habitat for whatever microbes are just in the environment to come and do their thing that can benefit our goals, as well as bioaugmentation, which is actual inoculation, growing microbes that can be used. So these two things are two core aspects of my work in terms of helping to expand the role of beneficial microbes so that we can address both pre-fire. There is no such thing as pre-fire or post-fire because everything is both pre-fire and post-fire, right? But it's all a time scale thing. But both, to prevent catastrophic wildfire as well as to address wildfire. A lot of my experience has been working on post-fire contaminants. And so I've been in the applied mycology world for a long time. I worked on a project in Ecuador trying to mitigate contaminants from oil contamination caused by Chevron, actually intentionally caused by them. We don't call it an oil spill down there because they dumped it because it was the cheapest thing they could do. And it's having major impacts on indigenous communities and agricultural communities in Eastern Ecuador. And so we've been trying to figure out ways to clean up the mess with fungi. And I've also been, so I had kind of an epiphany in 2018 after the campfire happened and realized that, these wildfires are becoming very serious and very scary, and that there's this missing piece of the puzzle, which is fungi. And, I started getting really curious about, ways that we can work with fungi to address wildfire. So yeah, and then 2 years later, so I started this like fire and fungi study group, and we started learning and doing some projects up in Paradise. And then in 2020, you all know about that fire season as well as we do down here, right? And that was when, it became really apparent that, okay, this is go time. There was a fire called the CZU Lightning Complex Fire, which burned 85,000 acres in the Santa Cruz and San Mateo County, and burned down a lot of homes of a lot of people in my community. And it was also this moment of people coming together, fire survivors, people in the larger community. The institutions were all shockingly slow at their response. Our RCD, our Resource Conservation District, was fantastic, but pretty much everybody else kind of left us alone. And, FEMA took forever, EPA took forever, and as you know, there was a lot of fires that year. And so I know that they were busy, but it became really clear to many of us that year that we can't, and now, especially with what's happening with the federal government, we've learned that we can't rely on these large institutions, especially federal institutions, not like we ever really could. And so a big part of my goal is to not only develop methodologies and refine our tactics for mitigating wildfire, but also to build infrastructure within communities for disaster response. What else can I say? Yeah, that's me. I lead mushroom foraging and plant foraging hikes in the area because it's fun. And I, spend a lot of time taking care of children. So the place where I'm coming from is this land here. I'll actually go back. So this is we believe it's the land of the Chitoni people. The Awaswa speaking region is like a subset of what is often called the Ohlone people. And there are no known descendants of the Awaswa speakers, of the people of the whole area that we call the Santa Cruz Mountains. The original name is Maseka. And it's often left up to the people from the surrounding tribes to help steward these lands and help guide these management practices. And I'm really lucky that where I live is actually a place that is a hub. There's a big house that houses tribal members for the area, and they've been helping to talk about our projects here, and it's available, the land is available to them. And so there's some collaborations that are beginning. And you know, the goal of this project and of this work in general is really to think about how working with these microbes, working with these plants, and working with the people can be a part of this process of decolonization. And this word decolonization, it gets thrown around a lot, and like it can be hard to say, like, oh, what is actually decolonizing, you know? But I think it's important to keep that in mind as a framework, as like an ethos for approaching this work and thinking about how we can support and enliven these ecosystems, the way Lila Darwish says, to create these natural systems and to support the kind of life that we want to build, and the ways of living that we want to create as well. And soil is such a foundational aspect of that. The way that you treat the soil is also the way that you treat each other. If you want to have healthy food to eat, you got to, you know, make sure your soil is clean. If you want to be connected with your ecosystem, you got to connect with that soil. So this is a great book, by the way, Earth Repair, which is it's a resource for folks who are interested in bioremediation. So there's so many educated folks in this group that I thought I would ask you if you have thoughts about how fire, floods, and fungi might be connected. So I wanted to invite folks to put something in the chat if something comes up for you, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, or if you have questions too, like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. We know that like fire and water are both elemental, and they interact with earth and air, right? And they tend to be these kind of polar opposites that interact a lot, right? And there are all these different cycles that each of them have that also interplay off of each other. But what kind of keeps them, you know, right now we have, well, what we're experiencing is our water cycle has gotten a little off balance, right? We have these flooding cycles and these drought cycles that are happening. And then with fire, we had, you know, fire suppression for so long, and now we're having catastrophic fire. So our fire cycle has gotten a little out of balance. So these two things are both intensifying at the same time. And part of the reason that I believe that that's happening is because of what's happening to the biology on the planet. And fungi are a major part of that that's often overlooked. So what are fungi? Let's talk about them real quick, real basic. Most people are familiar with saprotrophic fungi, which we call decomposer fungi sometimes as well. These are the ones that release enzymes into what we call a substrate. A substrate is its habitat/food source. And these enzymes break apart the hydrocarbon molecules in that substrate into smaller and smaller pieces. Some fungi are really good at breaking down things before they die, which is what we call pathogenic fungi. Some guys will break down stuff right after it dies, and then some wait till things are like very broken down. So we call those late decomposers. These obviously are really important ecologically. Otherwise, we would just have a buildup of woody debris. Buildup of woody debris. Why does that sound familiar? That's something that we think about a lot as land stewards, right? And these guys are responsible for 90% of the decomposition that happens worldwide. And part of that buildup of woody debris is also because of drought and fungi not being able to do their natural decomposition process. Another group of fungi that's important to understand are the mycorrhizal fungi. So what's happening here is the mycelium. So I forgot to define that. So the body of a fungus is this stuff called mycelium, which is a filamentous network that, you know, releases those enzymes that we were talking about. And in the case of mycorrhizal fungi, what they actually do is they go out foraging for metals and water. And then they're attached to the root system of a plant, and they will send that water and those minerals to the plant in exchange for glucose, which the plant makes through photosynthesis. So there's this beautiful symbiotic exchange here. And these mycorrhizal fungi create this stuff called glomalin, which is a fun word to say. And it's also the glue that holds together the soil. It creates an incredible storage space for carbon. about a third of the Earth's soil carbon is held by mycorrhizal fungi. So when we're thinking about climate change and also just thinking about ecosystem resilience in general, having that underground carbon storage is incredibly important. And they also hold on to water. They're like a slow sponge that releases water over time. Y'all aren't quite in a Mediterranean climate up there, right? You have a little bit of rain, more in the spring and the fall, but you have pretty dry summers, right?
We're kind of Mediterranean, but yeah, drier summers.
Yeah. So I'll just say that down here where we don't have, we can go like 6 months or so without rain, we still have green leaves on trees. And how are they surviving that long without any rain? And it's because these mycorrhizal fungi are acting like this sponge that slowly releases water over time. So we're going to talk about soil moisture in a minute, and thinking about that slow release of water over time and wildfire resilience, I think is just something I wanted to put out. So what is fire on a chemical level? And what is fungal degradation on a chemical level? Both of them involve the breakdown. Well, fungal degradation, biodegradation can, also, these both also break down lignin, but most of the tissue within plants or trees at least is cellulose. So cellulose and that chemical breakdown is actually quite similar with both combustion, fire, and what we call cold fire, which fungal biodegradation. The biggest difference, of course, is that fire involves the release of heat, and things need to be at a certain temperature for it to happen. And with fungi, it's isothermic, so it happens inside of their bodies, and it happens at ambient temperatures. But they both need oxygen, and they both transform chemical and physical composition of hydrocarbons. So also, Eugene mentioned that y'all are doing more and more prescribed burns, and folks are learning about how important that is for ecosystems. And a big part of the reason for that is because of the way that they're releasing those nutrients, because of that transformation of carbon and making minerals available. They also, both of these, I should put this in the slide, I'm just realizing, both of these alkalize the soil as well, which can be, which is a really important part of keeping the pH balanced for certain plants to be able to survive. So we need to, have a fire. Fire is actually very important because fungi can't do all of this work, especially if it's drying out, right? If there's a drought or if it's the dry season, you're going to have that buildup, of course. And that process can't happen. So fire and fungi, can kind of play off of each other and each do their part during their time of year. So in thinking about how we want to work with fungi, just as a framework, it's important to think about what they naturally do in their environment. So fungi after a fire, so a fire will change the soil microbial community composition, meaning that we have less of certain fungi and other microbes and more of what we call pyrophilic fungi. So folks might be familiar with the morels. They're kind of like the famous post-fire mushroom. And these are actually both saprotrophic and mycorrhizal, and they eat burnt material. Pyrolyzed organic matter is what we call it, the fancy word for that, burnt stuff. And they also support the growth of trees that are trying to recover after the fire. They also provide a really important food source for animals that are often very hungry. There's not a lot of food on a charred landscape. And bugs especially will love them. And then the birds will come and they'll eat the bugs, and then they'll poop out seeds, and or an animal will come and eat them and then poop out other seeds and fertilize the soil with their poop. And so they are helping to kickstart that regeneration process after a fire. And they've adapted with fire, for as long as there's been, there's always been fire on these lands, for as long as we know. And these guys have just been kind of waiting for these fires to happen. So it's been actually pretty amazing as a mycologist, as somebody who looks at fungi, to see what comes after the fire, and you see stuff that you didn't even know grew in your area that was just waiting, you know, sometimes for decades upon decades, to be able to come out and do their thing. There are all these fungi that nobody knew what they were that came after our fire. Like all the best mycologists would be trying to figure out what these mushrooms that were like covering hillsides were, you know? So it's important to keep in mind that they're there all the time and they're often just waiting for their moment. You know, I've been to other places, you know, as a mushroom forager, there'll be places I go every year and I think I know all the mushrooms there. And then one year there's like a carpet of this one kind of different kind of mushroom that I've never seen before. You know, these things happen. They're also acting as a natural filter in the soil. So that mycelium acts like a biological filter. And we'll talk more about how we can work at that in a second. So these mycorrhizal fungi can support plant communities returning. They help hold on to the soil. I was talking about that glomalin, right? So they prevent runoff, they prevent erosion. They can hold on to minerals and carbon. They address the hydrophobicity. Have folks heard of soil hydrophobicity? Have you guys gotten into that with your course? Okay, so just real quick, a fire happens. There are certain chemicals that are released by plants that are kind of oily, and they make it so that when the rain hits it, it kind of slides off. And that's why we have a lot of post-fire erosion. And debris flow events can be, you know, quite scary in some areas, as y'all might be familiar with. The other reason that soil, post-fire soil is so fragile, is that it doesn't have mycelium towards the top. So fire often burns down about the first top inches of the topsoil or so, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on the severity, right? And intensity. But that's an area where fungi would normally just be catching that water and like a sponge, right? That mycelium, which we don't even see, but it's in the leaves, it's in that O horizon right below the leaves of soil. And it's holding on to that water and slowly releasing and cushioning the impact. But if all of that stuff is burned and if the soil is burned down into it, it can't do that job. And then I think it's also important to think about how fire is also keeping pathogenic fungi in check, right? So there are two different approaches to pathogenic fungi. The most people in the mainstream you know, more conventional approach just see it as you know, these are invasive species that we need to just, you know, use fungicide for, and we need to stop them. If you use fungicide on a tree that relies on mycorrhizal fungi to survive, you will kill that tree. So these approaches are very limited in terms of how effective they can actually be. There are also ecosystemic approaches, which see it as, okay, fire suppression is actually the problem here. And yes, some of these species are just invasive and because of climate change, drought stress, habitat loss, you know, cloud cover loss. There are different factors that can also be contributing. But there's more of a complex reason that these pathogens are being able to take hold, and through land management practices, including prescribed burns, we can often address these issues. It's tricky though. It's also important to think about how, so did y'all know that there are microbes that are like part of the water cycle as well as the fire cycle? Isn't that cool? This stuff, I just wanted to just throw this out there because I just think it's really fascinating. This paper, Kobziar et al. 2022, I recommend checking it out. Wildland fire smoke alters the composition, diversity, and potential atmospheric function of microbial life in the aerobiome. So the aerobiome is this whole complex web of life that involves fungi and bacteria that move around depending on what's happening atmospherically. So what this study found was that there's actually more diversity of microbes in areas affected with that have smoke and wildfire than there is in areas that don't have wildfire. And all of these, we might have learned about how, like, smoke can travel around the world to different places. Like, we know the East Coast got some of the smoke from, the fires out west and things like that, or we got the smoke from Canada. So all of that smoke that's moving around is also moving around microbes. And they do a lot of different interesting things that we're still learning about. But one of the things that they do is they create these ice nucleating particulates that help to essentially speed up the process of cloud condensation. And cloud condensation, we talked about this during our outdoor school, Nicole. Do you remember we do the little water cycle thing? Condensation, precipitate. That water cycle song, by the way, is so oversimplified and it skips all the biology. So actually, I want to like rewrite that song. Anyway, biology is a really important part of the water cycle that's often overlooked. And this condensation is increased by wildfire smoke, essentially. And that's part of the reason that we're in this fire and flood kind of doom cycle that we're in right now, where we have these bigger fires, which lead to bigger floods. The bigger floods sometimes lead to more invasive species, which lead to bigger fires. And, we get kind of stuck in these cycles. So that was a lot. I'm going to guess that there's questions in the chat. I can't see the chat quite yet, but I will check it soon. So yeah, if folks want to think about, what are these reasons that we hear? Folks want to shout it out, like, ignore my list if you want to just think about it on your own. What are some of the reasons that you hear about that are why wildfires are becoming more catastrophic? Does anybody want to chime in? I'm talking a lot.
Build up a fuel.
What's that? Build up a fuel.
A fuel.
Yeah.
A combination of abiotic and biotic stressors.
Ooh, nice.
So general.
Yeah, climate change gets blamed a lot, which are leading to these wind-driven fires. So like, LA, I think it's really important to keep in mind there that like no amount of fuel mitigation would have prevented that. It might have made it less bad, but it was going to happen either way because that was a wind-driven fire. And those, those are increasing. So that's important to keep in mind. Drought, rising temperature, deforestation and habitat loss. So I'll talk about that more in a minute, but like thinking about, plants create clouds. They are part of the water cycle. They hold on to water, they transpire. You can actually bring rivers and streams and rainfall back to a desert by planting trees, right? They call in the rain. Invasive plants, cheatgrass, for example, and other annual plants. These annual plants do not have mycorrhizal partners, keeping that in mind. Human ignition, right? Gender reveal parties, things like that. And then people living in places that are a fire ecology, right? And I'm one of those people that lives in a fire ecology. And I think you as all as land stewards would understand better than most that like with that comes a huge responsibility to manage for fire in your area. So there are some factors that I feel like are really important. I don't just feel like, I know that these factors are actually really important, contributing factors to climate change and to wildfire that are often overlooked. So a lot of people are not talking about the role of deforestation. So if you cut down those trees, you're also killing off the mycorrhizal fungi that use them as a partner to get their glucose. And that mycorrhizal fungi will then release a lot of that carbon into the air, thus contributing to climate change. We'll lose that lovely cloud cover, especially redwoods here, are really important for maintaining the clouds. and you'll of course lose that soil moisture. So what happens when you have a forest that, an old growth forest that was tended with fire, that has nice spread out trees, is going to hold on to a lot more carbon and be a lot less flammable than a post clear cut forest that tends to be very crowded. The trees a lot more scraggly, and it would be much easier for a fire to spread and become hotter, become a crown fire, than a tended to landscape. This picture on the right here shows the difference between annual grasses and perennial grasses and grasses that have mycorrhizal partners. So you can see that difference and how much carbon they're able to hold on to, how much less erosion you're going to have, and as well as how much soil moisture there's going to be there. So this is, well, and just to keep in mind, you all might have heard of the Dust Bowl, which was really just a loss of mycorrhizal fungi. It was from plowing, essentially. People plowed up all of these grasslands that had all these mycorrhizal fungi, and in doing so, they killed off the mycorrhizal fungi, and they lost this incredible, 5-foot deep topsoil that had been building up over thousands of years. Quite sad, but what's cool is we can build it back. And there are ways to do that. Also, okay, so we're humans, we're animals, and part of our role, I believe, as mammals in particular, is to be these mediators between fire and water. So y'all might have learned about how beavers can prevent wildfire by building dams, creating these wetlands, which are also great for wildlife. So many different added benefits. And if we are instead, paving over these waterways and not letting that water sink into the groundwater and just sending it out to the ocean the way they are here in my area, downtown Santa Cruz, well, at least they haven't paved under the river here, but we have these levees. All of downtown Santa Cruz used to be a floodplain. It is no longer such. And much of LA was also a floodplain. And instead of creating, a little park, a little buffer for those floods to be caught by the biota and the soil, they decided to just pave under the whole thing, send all that water, all that beautiful fresh drinking water right out to the ocean. And now they're running out of drinking water, which they have to bring in from Colorado and the Sierras and all over the place because they did this. Bears are another animal that help to mitigate fire. And this is something that I think about a lot with my experiment. We used to have a lot of bears up and down the West Coast. And bears like to eat bugs out of trees. And what they would do is they would knock over a snag, a dead tree, to be able to get at the bugs that are in there. And do you think a standing dead tree or lying down on the ground dead tree is going to be more flammable? Probably the one on the ground, right? Because it can get decomposed more quickly by fungi. So, just bringing some of that dead organic matter onto the ground, that's lop and scatter is what we call that, right? In the fire mitigation world, right? Just bringing stuff, they were doing lop and scatter before that was a phrase. And so I just think it's interesting that bears were doing this wonderful work. And then we use bears as a symbol of fire suppression. And then also just killed off all of these bears. The bear that's on the California state flag is extinct because of humans. So that's sad. So let's just taking a moment here to, kind of zoom out a little bit. When we have an extreme wildfire or a catastrophic wildfire, there are a number of ecological threats. Obviously, we have the release of toxins into our environment from burned structures. And if those are above a sensitive waterway, it becomes an even bigger threat. And then we can also have nutrient flow and like sediment going down into waterways. did y'all had a lot of risk of mudslides and erosion after the Alameda fire, right? I think I remember hearing a lot about that. You of course have ash in the air, and often that ash has heavy metals in it, and other contaminants coming from the burned structures. We have that hydrophobic soil that we spoke about. If it's a high severity catastrophic fire, you can also have, increased risk of future fires if you don't take care of the land well and the soil doesn't have a good chance to recover. If you just have runoff and you lose all those mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, the only thing that can grow is going to be that cheatgrass. It's going to be those annual invasives. You'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here. And while there are certain species that really benefit from wildfire and actually require it in order to survive, such as the black-backed woodpecker and certain ferrets, it also can be a major habitat loss issue for a lot of critters. And there's just such sad stories about people finding, dead owls and deer and critters like that. Oh, some of the stories coming out of Australia just made me cry. So some of the contaminants that we deal with after fire, the big ones are heavy metals. Lead is a huge issue in LA right now. But there can also be mercury. Chromium is a really big one post-fire, and aluminum from burned down cars. And so these are in a category that we call inorganic contaminants. So heavy metals can't be broken down. In very rare cases, they can be transformed into a less toxic form. But typically what we want to do with heavy metals is lock them up or get them out of the place where they're causing problems and put them somewhere safe. All the rest of these contaminants on this list are in a group that we call organic compounds. The most common of them are hydrocarbons. We often talk about so I'm a hydrocarbon, plants are hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons aren't necessarily toxic, but polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons can be very problematic. So these are, from petroleum-based products. We have our VOCs, we have dioxins and furans, which are particularly tricky to deal with. We have PCBs, and then we also have, there's, I almost want, PFAS are on here, the polyfluoroalkyl substances, but those are the forever chemicals that are becoming an even bigger problem. And then, of course, the microplastics as well. So bioremediation I see it as an approach, as a way of thinking about contamination, as well as, a series of methodologies. So it's working with the existing biology in the area, maybe, either that bioaugmentation, where we're just creating habitat for them, or biostimulation. I'm sorry, biostimulation is where we're creating habitat, bioaugmentation is where we grow them. So it's working with nature to help heal nature, essentially. And it's not just for soil, but it can be for water and air as well. I'll just mention also that it takes a village, right? It takes an ecosystemic approach. So fungi get a lot of credit for being these amazing remediators, but bacteria and plants, as well as protozoa, nematodes, amoebas, some of these other living beings, even animals, we are transforming organic matter when we eat. We are, our metabolic processes are not that different from fungi. We're all playing a role in this process as well, and doing things in a different certain orders can help. And in certain sequences, mimicking ecological succession is a great way to approach it. So microremediation is working with fungi for dealing with contaminants. those hydrocarbon molecules that we talked about before, the saprotrophic fungi, they break apart that bond between the hydrogen and the carbon, and they transform that often into something less toxic. They can also help with metals, but it's complicated, and plants tend to be a lot more helpful for metals, but it depends on the situation. So this was after the CZU Lightning Complex fire. This is a site in Boulder Creek. This is, I've got the our late friend Zach on the left, and then my colleague and dear friend Taylor Bright on the right. What we were doing in this picture actually is stuffing existing wattles with myceliated substrate to help it grow within that wattle. We've since gotten our own machine, but the idea here, so wattles, y'all are probably familiar with them. You see them on the sides of roads, right? They're just burlap sacks filled with straw, typically. And part of the reason that they're actually so effective at mitigating erosion is that they are doing biostimulation. They're creating habitat. You're just putting substrate for microbes there. And then you put them in contact with the ground, dig them a little trench. I like to bury mine like 3 to 6 inches into the ground so that they have even more contact with the soil and hold on to more moisture. The best management practices protocol for them is just 2 inches, which, if that's all you have time for, go for it. But I like to do a little deeper. So just wattles on their own, I think, are great, except that you're using a non-native plant often, and you have to source your straw from somewhere. So there's some drawbacks. But what you can also do is add fungi into them to create that mycelial network that can hold on to the metals, so immobilize the metals, grab onto them, and make it so they don't run off into the waterway below. And then they can also help break down those polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, help with those dioxins and furans as well, and some of those other organic compounds. They're a temporary method. They're not permanent. They're not going to hold on to that metal forever. So then you also have to decide what you're going to do with them after, the debris removal happens, and, what your long-term plan is, because they're going to break down those wattles. So behind that wattle in that picture is a compost sock. And those are great because they're basically filled with composted mulch. But they are also, the outside is plastic, and we don't love plastic, and putting more plastic into our environment, which will break down a bit and enter that ecosystem. So our first study was started in 2020 after the 2020 fires. It started in the CZU, but we actually expanded the study to take place in 5 different burn scars from the 2020 fires, all in Central California. And we were comparing, wattles that were inoculated with an oyster mushroom, a locally sourced Pleurotus pulmonarius, and having a no wattle control and uninoculated wattle. So that study expanded out, and then we actually now have a study site. Well, I guess for the last 5 years now, we've had a study site in Southern Oregon. So I can share, we're going to have a couple of papers from this study come out soon, and I'll make sure to share with you guys. So for this one, we were not just looking at contaminant mitigation, but also at how we can stabilize the soil, how we can prevent erosion, checking for those soil stable aggregates, which is that glue that holds the soil together. We're looking at restoring soil microbial richness and diversity, as well as carbon sequestration.
Maya, there's a question about the wattles that I think is good to bring up now. Can you speak to the issue with time since fire event and effectiveness of the treatment of inoculated wattles or other material?
Yes. This is why y'all should buy one of these. This is why I'm always encouraging folks to get their ducks in a row before the fire happens, because it is really hard when you're scrambling right after the fire to get these installed. We had all this interest and all this excitement, all these people after the fire in Maui, and we still couldn't get wattles in time. Here and in other places where communities have been able to like really pull together and make stuff happen, and there's money that manifests out of nowhere, and you can get them in time. But basically you have your window of time is from when the fire happens to when the next rain comes. And if you don't get it in right before the next rain, like it's okay, it's still worth doing, but that should be your goal. And that's a really short timeline if you don't have funding and you don't have a machine. And so, you know, this is a very small machine. It's not a big industrial one, but it works for our purposes and for our experiment. And it's like $5,000. So it's not, you know, it's like something somewhat reasonable for some kind of institution or a community to write a grant for and try to get. RCDs sometimes have these. But then there's also like big companies that make that have wattle machines too that you can try to connect with. We had this wonderful company which no longer does this. The cool guy that worked there doesn't work there anymore, but we had people donating compost socks and wattles, which was wonderful. And then you need like a big work party for everybody to install them. And yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. So yeah, we've definitely found that it works way better if you make your wattle with the inoculant as you're putting that in as you're stuffing the wattles rather than trying to cut holes in them, because you lose that structural integrity. And it's also the way mushrooms like to grow is the mycelium likes to incubate for a couple of weeks. They like to be wrapped. We wrap these in a tarp. You don't want to use grain spawn if you can manage to not use grain, because little mice will come and eat it. I like nutrified sawdust if possible as an inoculated inoculant source. So yeah, it's nice to like be able to make your wattles and let them incubate for a while so all that mycelium can grow out through them, and then install them. I'm trying to work less with fruiting mushrooms because mushrooms, when they fruit, it depends also on like what your situation is. If you have people who, if it's like right outside somebody's house where they can return there and check every day, that's one thing, because mushrooms will sometimes hyperaccumulate, so concentrate heavy metals into their fruiting body. The fruiting body is the mushroom. So a mushroom is not the organism itself, it's just its genitalia, it's just its fruit. And it's just there to spread spores. So if you can pick that mushroom and put it somewhere safe, like in a sludge bucket or somewhere where, you know, it's not going to go right into the waterway, that's great. If you're not sure that you can be there to collect those mushrooms, then you might want to consider working with other types of microbes that don't produce fruiting bodies, because then you could have animals come and eat those, or maybe even people will come and eat them. This is a picture of one of our study sites. It's kind of what it looks like. These are all our soil analysis. I'm running low on time, so I'm just going to kind of skip through some of this. I wanted to share a little bit about Maui Bioremediation Group and EarthRM, which are two different arms of the same organization that has been doing work both in Lahaina and in Kula. Kula is another town that had a catastrophic wildfire on the same night as the one in Lahaina. So they've been taking the approach of the fungal inoculated filter socks, as well as liquid biological soil amendments, and taking more of that soil food web approach where you look at the whole microbial community. So I used to be very myco-focused, and then I realized that I was missing out on all of these different components of this ecosystem, right? So the bacteria, the protozoa, the microarthropods, all of these elements of soil microbial communities are important for restoration. And you need to have all of the different players present. This is a cool story that came out of that whole process, where these two high schoolers found that this native grass actually increases the water absorption of, so they call them filter socks or bio socks down there because wattles are an invasive tree. So these kids, they went to, they got second place in the National Science Fair contest. It's pretty cool. So yeah, I went down there and I helped them learn how to install wattles and do some of this work, and spent a lot of time on Zoom with those folks. And yeah, we collected some local native fungi. So native fungi is always a tricky thing to talk about because we don't know what was here often pre-colonial. And especially in a place like Hawaii, there's not a lot that is actually that you can claim as native. It's very tricky. Um, what I like to work, the phrase I'm using more and more is local beneficial, because we can figure out things that, okay, we know that this isn't pathogenic. Mycorrhizal fungi are always safe to work with because the worst thing that they'll generally do is just not grow if it's not the right fit for the environment, or they'll help out a tree. With the exception being certain amanitas like the death cap can be somewhat invasive and reduce biodiversity of mycorrhizal fungal communities. So we need to be thinking about that as well. But generally what you can do is just find, so we went to an area that had burned a few years prior, and this is something that I recommend folks do for restoration. And you can collect soil, you can collect fungal cultures and grow them out. Those are typically going to be, those are the ones that are naturally doing that post-fire restoration, right? So we can grow those out and then apply them to the areas that just burned and help to initiate that restoration process. Yeah, I've been working with these folks in SoCal and Altadena and Pasadena, and Palisades, excuse me, who, it's just horrific what's happened down there. And this project has involved myco wattles, and as well as some soil remediation. And then I'm actually hosting, I don't know if anybody wants to come, I'm hosting a biome logs workshop here in Santa Cruz, but bringing up a bunch of the Southern California folks. And then I'll also be going down there to do some trainings. But we'll be doing wildfire, floods, and forestry in-person workshop here November 15th and 16th. You're all invited. I can put the info in the chat at the end. And so, yeah, so there's some cool experiments that are coming out of this and a lot of coordination around soil analyses and testing for metals. They're in the process this week of finally buying an XRF, a mobile XRF, which is a device that's used to test for heavy metals in the soil. And heavy metal testing has been a real struggle for folks down there. It's typically, in every other fire in California, it's been done by the EPA and FEMA. And we all know what's happened to those federal institutions over the last year, and they refuse to do the testing. Yeah, this is, if anybody's interested in connecting with this group, happy to talk to you more about it. So with this stuff, I want to talk a little bit about my research. Oh, and I just have 2 minutes left. Is it okay if I go to like 7:05 or 7:10 or something? Okay. It's such a tricky thing to know when to intervene because we know that wildfire, even high intensity, massive, high severity wildfires are a part of this ecosystem and have been for thousands of years, right? And we see so many different species that are adapted to that. So fire is not a bad thing, but like when do we intervene? What is our role here as humans? And I like to prioritize the home ignition zone area, the area around human structures. And also I think a lot about sorry, my dog is barking. How it's going to affect that ecosystem in the long term. If it's killing off all of the oak trees and upsetting the balance of diversity between different plants, if it's destroying a whole habitat, if it's, a big fire that is just one fire that covers a whole huge area and doesn't leave any holes or gaps, that's going to be a harder thing to restore. So in terms of where we intervene, microbes can kind of interrupt this cycle, the fire frequency cycle that we've been stuck in, and help to create the kind of vegetation and plant communities that are going to become a little bit more fire resilient, as well as increase soil moisture, which is more and more being considered as a major factor in wildfire. There's actually a lot of new research happening at San Jose State University, where I go to school, that's looking at the importance of soil moisture and increasing soil moisture to prevent wildfire. Want to just mention that there are a lot of disaster capitalists of all kinds in the fire world, right? We have, you know, the land grabbers taking homes from Native folks in Lahaina. We have also this post-fire logging thing, which is a myth, that fires make it so that, you know, oh, everything's dead. We might as well just cut it all down just to salvage what's left of it. It's actually the worst time that you could possibly go in to cut down a forest ecologically is right after a fire, even a high intensity fire. You might have a lot of dead standing trees. You might need to make some fire breaks. You might need to do a little bit of thinning. But all of that, all of those dead trees, they still have carbon in them. They still have nutrients in them. Those are the building blocks of the recovery. And if you just tear up the soil and bring in all these logging trucks and take all of that precious biomass away, of course you're going to have another catastrophic wildfire in another 40, 50 years. Like, it's just inevitable. So this is a scam. There's also a lot of legislation that is along these same lines. We have the Fix Our Forest Acts, which last I knew it was still in the Senate and it hasn't passed yet. It probably will pass, but it basically removes environmental regulations for any project that's just says that they're doing it in the name of wildfire resilience. So it means you don't have to go through, you know, these normal, you don't have to jump through all of these hoops, all of these environmental regulations, and you can just kind of cut down whatever trees that you want as long as you're saying that you're doing it for wildfire. And it overlooks all of these other factors that we talk about, you know, that are factors that are contributing to wildfire and just focuses on fuels. And then, of course, we have this horrific executive order of the many horrific executive orders that we've had that calls for the immediate expansion of American timber production. And then we also, this one is a little bit of old news. It's passed. It was this emergency proclamation here in California to fast track wildfire prevention projects that also allows these projects to bypass environmental regulations. So I think that, you know, we really need to be having these conversations about, like, is biomass removal necessary? Is it actually beneficial, or are they just saying that it is? And have a lot of skepticism when we see these kinds of projects. My work right now is around how this biomass can be actually a resource, and not just seen as a problem, not just fire fuel. So y'all are probably familiar with both these, right? Pile burning and lop and scatter, which are common tactics used for removing ladder fuels from forests, especially in the wild and urban interface, especially in the home ignition zone. And what I'm trying to do is add another tool in the toolbox for folks in these areas. So this project has been a collaboration between a bunch of different institutions, and I have a preliminary study where I'm just taking logs, partially burying them, and trying out different inoculants to see the impacts on soil carbon and soil microbial communities. And then my big study, which I only have a graphic for because it hasn't happened. It's going to happen actually in a couple weeks, which is exciting. We're staging the materials right now. It's a form of modified hugelkultur, if you've heard of that. That's a traditional gardening technique that comes from Germany. And bioswales are also very similar, which kind of create that curvature in the land to be able to capture water. The short of it is I'm taking mycorrhizal inoculants, putting them in the soil. I'm inoculating logs with a decomposer fungus. I'm putting the coarse woody debris and some biochar on top of that. I'm putting the leaves and the even more coarse material on top of that. I've got a special kind of compost that I'll tell you about in a second on top of that, and then the topsoil. So creating this layering allows for a lot of diversity, and it's a way to incorporate all of that, all of the different types of organic matter on the land. And the metrics that I'm looking at are soil moisture, soil aggregation. I'm going to do a little financial analysis. Carbon storage and sequestration is actually really quite difficult to measure. So I'm really just going to look at total soil organic carbon, and then microbial community composition. And that'll be both through microscopy and through soil DNA analysis. I've been a big fan of the Soil Food Web School and these folks, Keisha and Casey, who have a school called the Compost Academy. And basically what we're doing is creating the conditions for the growth of those local beneficial microbes, which are on the surfaces of leaves, they're in the poop, they're in the wood chips. So we've added all of these materials to this special kind of compost pile. It's more work than just like your backyard tumbler kind of thing. You need to maintain the soil moisture and the temperature, and turn it, on a regular schedule. But this is a great method that can deal with a lot of, so it's basically just composting the forest. So for us, it's a way to grow the microbes that we want to work with, but you can also use this method for just composting those fuels, all of that biomass can be incorporated in this way. So then coming back to that original question, I'm curious if anything else came up for folks. And yeah, maybe we'll just leave it at that, and we'll transition into the Q&A. And if folks want to ask their questions or chime in if they had any new thoughts about this question, I'll leave it at that. Oh, and please reach out to me if you have any questions. If you're interested in ever coming down here, I do lead applied mycology workshops and mushroom foraging hikes in the area, and would be happy to stay connected.
Thank you, Maya. I am scrolling back to the top of our chat for some questions. I know you spoke about those really hot fires burning the surface and the fungi below the ground. That was a question that Alex had. And building on that, I was kind of wondering different intensities of fires might have more effect on those underground fungi, right?
Yeah.
And so
yeah, and there's you might have heard people talking about how like, oh, fire is sterilizing the soil. It doesn't, almost never actually sterilizes the soil. Because fungi, depending on what the soil was like, if it's crappy or agricultural soil, maybe, yeah. And if it was just covered with cheatgrass, okay, maybe. But if it was a forest, there's soil way, 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 way deep down. And there's microbes way, way deep down. So they can come back.
did that answer your question, Alex? Okay. And then Alex was also looking for the author of that book that you mentioned at the early on.
Oh, Earth Repair, Lila Darwish. Yeah, Lila's a dear friend. She does a bioremediation course every year. I'll just put her name in the chat. It's actually midstream right now, but you can, it's through Earth Activist Training. I definitely recommend the training.
All right. Back your earlier question, which you've returned back around to, of how fire, fungi, and floods are connected. Laurel had included in the chat, fire and fungi makes me think about a switch in fungal communities, but I'm intrigued how floods fit into the picture.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I didn't quite touch on that. So floods also cleanse the soil in a similar way that fire does. So fire, helps pathogens, helps just kind of alter microbial communities. It changes things chemically. And floods do a really similar thing where, a lot of aerobic microbes will die when the soil becomes flooded. And it also changes the chemical composition of the soil in a way that certain plants are going to come back more than others, right? So yeah, floods are also a natural. So if we often think of, people are evolved enough to know that fires are a natural part of this ecosystem, but floods are as well. Floods are totally normal and healthy and actually really ecologically important.
Can you touch on why the mycorrhizae bind to heavy metals better than the fruiting bodies? Amber wonders.
Better than the fruiting bodies?
Yeah.
So we got to distinguish two different terms. So mycelium, I think my mycorrhizae might be getting mixed up here. So mycelium is the body of a fungus. Um, and most, except for like yeasts and a few other exceptions, most of the fungi that we work with and talk about have mycelium. So both the saprotrophic and the mycorrhizal fungi have mycelium. Mycorrhizal fungi are a subgroup, a certain ecological function of fungi that have that symbiotic relationship with plants. So
I
I
can
think the question
elaborate
was
on
like,
the
why do
question.
what's that?
Oh, I can elaborate on the question. I'm
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
curious because maybe you're familiar with Cheetah Chudy of
Yeah,
remediation, and some of his
totally.
research has indicated that sampling the fruiting bodies really didn't show significant changes in uptake of heavy metals. And then some of your research is showing that maybe the mycelium below ground is doing a better job of that. And I'm wondering if that's like a function of moisture or, just time, or maybe, yeah, if you can expand on that.
Yeah, so metals need something to bind to, right? And so it depends on the species of fungus. It also depends on the alkalinity of the soil. That's going to affect whether or not the mycelium can hold on to it. And whether or not it gets concentrated into the fruiting body, like I don't know. I think, sometimes people have seen, so the studies that have shown that have been with like petroleum contamination, where there's like a distinct amount of metals and they sequester it into their fruiting bodies. Yeah, I don't it's the cheetahs study was really interesting and helpful in that. I mean, it was a small study, so keeping that in mind too. A really valuable but very small study. Um, it does indicate that you can't always rely on that, right? It's another piece of that research that shows like, okay, so sometimes they help with this, sometimes they don't. Plants are much more reliable in terms of whether or not they're going to uptake metals.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember him also mentioning the time factor, where I think it was about 2 years had already passed by the time he had that project funded after the campfire. And he
Yeah.
thought that that was maybe a significant influencing element.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah. Yeah, and I think he was specifically looking at chromium too, with that one. And it might be different also depending on what kind of metal.
You were talking about the morels popping up from recent burns, and I commented about I need to go check my burn piles for morels, but now I'm kind of second guessing that with the heavy metals in the fruiting body. Would that be less of a concern with just a regular wood burn pile than a forest fire that's taken out houses and cars and such?
Yeah, if you're not below any kind of source of contamination, I think is fine. Yeah.
Amber mentioned might be nice to address how pile burning methods could reduce the negative heat impact that occurs. Can you talk a little bit
Negative
about
heat
that?
impact. What do you mean by that?
So you had mentioned a little bit about like if you have a prolonged fire in one area, it's gonna impact the soil, functions differently than if you have. This is why people prefer, right, like a broadcast burn to,
Right.
jackpot burning or something, because it concentrates heat in one area too long. And I know that some folks are addressing that by like arresting it sooner and creating biochar and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, just kind of curious if you've come across any other tips or tricks for folks, that are doing that sort of thing on their property so that they can minimize the impact, because pile burning is a really critical tool for folks who are not ready for prescribed fire, but it has like its own issues.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think pile burns are great, and I absolutely love the technique of putting out the fire early and also just stacking the wood really close so that there's not too much oxygen in there and you get those nice big chunks of charcoal at the end. I think you already know the answer. Like, I think that's the way to go. Um, and just to tag on to what you're saying, pile burns are great. They're definitely an indispensable tool for land managers, and you can only do them certain times of the year. And you can't do them on super steep slopes. And you also are just putting some carbon out into the air, so they do have their limitations, and that's part of the reason for just trying to create more tools in the toolbox.
Can you talk a little bit about fire followers? Wondering if, assuming much of those can't survive catastrophic wildfires, anecdotally, Amber saw a lot of ceanothus in the Santa Cruz Mountains after the 2020 fires. Wondering a little bit about that.
About fire following plants?
Yes, and
Yeah, can you just speak to
Go
like,
ahead.
is there a threshold, like a known kind of threshold of like, okay, they can survive this or they can't survive that versus like you're saying, when a hot, intense fire comes through, it really exposes it for the succession of invasive annuals and all that. And I mean, obviously Santa Cruz Mountains got torched pretty good. I was living and working near
Yeah.
Pie Ranch for the year after that. So
Okay.
I saw very, very much
Yeah.
firsthand some of the returning vegetation, and it was interesting to see both invasives, but also things like ceanothus doing really well.
There is a paper that I'm trying to Google it really quick, but I'll give me a moment. I'll try to find it for you. By Tom Bruns and Monica Fisher out of UC Berkeley, who have a paper that addresses that threshold concept. I'm going to see if I can find it for you. Here,
Awesome. Thanks.
pyroclasm. I think it's this one right here. I cited it actually in my thesis, so I should have it easier. Yes, the Goldilocks zone. Yeah, so this is the thing that they're talking about like there's this, so this might be a little bit more science than we're ready to go, but there's two different major groups of fungi phylogenetically, the basidiomycetes and the ascomycetes, and fire tends to have a bigger adverse impact on the basidiomycetes. And that's why we see those morels, which are ascomycetes, and we see these beautiful cup fungi, like in my little intro slide, and a lot of these other kind of like funny looking blobby guys that don't have gills. So there's what they're talking about in this paper that I'll share is that there's kind of this like there's this sweet spot that creates the conditions for these fire following fungi, but it doesn't also just like doesn't kill them all off, but it also doesn't allow all their competitors to be there as well. Here, I'll put this in the chat. And if anybody wants a PDF, I have, university access right now, so I can get all the papers for free, which is really nice.
Oh, thank you.
thank you, Maya. Eugene has his hand raised, and then we've got a couple questions about inoculation returning back to the chat. Eugene? Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Mine's kind of inoculation related to, I got tool jealousy a little bit when I saw that wattle making machine. And after the Alameda fire, we used a lot of wattles here, and we bought them from somewhere else, Home Depot, who knows where they came from. But we also processed a ton of small diameter wood that was burned and things like that afterwards. And I was thinking about, and could we have stuffed our own wattles with wood chip or masticated wood products and inoculated them and gotten value that way?
Totally. So that's something I've been trying to figure out. And, it depends on your wattle machine and how picky it is in terms of like, our machine, we found that we can use not, straw is what people typically use, but I hate buying GMO straw. And then like there's so many chemicals on it. And then I'm also allergic to it. And here you are just like buying this, mass produced flammable thing that, you know, was grown in an area where it was probably increasing fire risk as it was being grown and then it's shipped across the country. Like, I don't like having to buy straw. So yeah, using the materials on the land is far more ideal. It's just a lot harder to stuff the socks unless you've got a really versatile machine. I wish I had a good recommendation for one that was more versatile than ours. If you find one, let me know. We have found that we can add in a little bit of wood chips here and there and mix it with the straw. We've also found that shredded cardboard does great in our machine. So if you can also, if you're buying a bunch of equipment and you can buy a big cardboard shredder, you know, cardboard is so abundant and is a great substrate for a lot of microbes. And is a great way to get things, it's a good food source for them to kind of get started on too, and then they'll be hungry for something else.
And like building on that, I mean, I saw you mentioned that you collect a lot of your products locally, close to wherever you're applying them or using them. Um, you know, how important do you think that is? Like, could we be processing conifer forest fuel material, you know, post thinning material and building wattles that would get used in a floodplain, or would you really need to work with this a type of wood that was local to that vicinity in order to get the extra value out of it in terms of inoculation?
Totally. I mean, microbes are only going to grow where they have their food that they're used to eating, right? So like if those Doug firs weren't already growing in that wetland, I don't think that they would be that great to add there unless you also inoculated them ahead of time, but that would also change the whole microbial community dynamic.
Mhm.
So that would be something to keep in mind. Um, yeah, I think I can get in a lot of trouble if I don't answer this question correctly with a lot of people, because a lot of people are really adamant, you know, about not moving microbes around and get very scared when you talk about even, you know, microbial inoculation, even though just that term. Yeah, I could tell you some stories about places I would have wanted. I felt totally safe and fine about putting different microbes and people getting all, ooh, I don't know, it's not super local. It's not like from here.
Yeah.
And so the things that are in the area are going to be the most adapted, but the climate is changing, the world is changing. What was here before isn't always what's going to be best able to manage for the future, right? And so I think we need to prioritize native, you know, plants and microbes as much as we can, but also have a little bit of an open mind. And no, obviously we're not going to work with anything invasive. We're not going to work with things that are pathogenic. We're going to be very, very careful about not moving those kinds of things around. But things that, you know, can be beneficial, like the most, like, well, Hawaii is a whole other story. They've been
Yeah.
struggling with this issue there a lot as well, because the fungi that grow there, we don't know if they're native, you know, a lot of the time, or here we don't know what's native. Nobody was doing DNA analyses here 300 years ago, right, on soil microbial communities. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
For my study to keep all of my partner organizations happy, I'm definitely being only using things that are within 6 kilometers of my study sites and only moving microbes that far. In the future, I'd be open to a wider distance. As long as so also I should mention that this wildfire resilience compost, this method of composting the forest, if it's done correctly, it won't allow any pathogenic microbes to grow. And then you can verify that with microscopy and with DNA analyses.
Thanks.
There are two more questions on inoculation. Alex, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hey, Maya, I've been trying to inoculate, I've been trying to move mushrooms around to try to get some work done in my forest. And I'm not having a lot of luck with it. Like I can move them fine, but then they don't grow back. And I even bought some plugs, like mushroom plugs, and then put them into a, you know, downed oak tree, and that didn't work either. Is there some, I heard you say cardboard. Is there some better way to be doing this? Plus, I do notice that my mulch piles, I leave them for a long time and I can see the mycelium in them. And then I try to move that. I'm having a really hard time getting them to go. Do you have any suggestions for how to get that
Yeah, I mean,
going.
mushroom cultivation is a fine and complex art, so we could have done a whole presentation about that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm like, so where do I begin, right? But there are ways of growing, fungi from your backyard and expanding those out. I was actually just doing that this afternoon before this talk. Um, in terms of logs, I would be careful. What kind of mushroom were you inoculating with? And
Shiitake.
shiitake, uh-huh. So it probably won't naturalize. There's been a few little stories here and there of that happening, but and it was on oaks, it sounds like, right?
It took 3 years, that didn't work. So I'm just trying to see
You
what
try soaking the logs first.
they're wet. Oh, I kept them wet.
What you can do is actually just like fully submerge them in water, which will have two benefits. One is being that it'll make sure that the water is like fully in in between all of the different cells. And so there's more it makes it easier softens it up for the mycelium to grow. It also has the added benefit of reducing competition with other aerobic microbes or other fungi, right? Because when it's fully underwater, nothing can breathe under there. So if it's fully submerged, none of it touching the surface of the water, leave it there for like a few days, 4 or 5 days, and then pull it out and then inoculate it. That might help.
Okay, so
Shiitakes are tricky though.
I'm done with the exotic ones. I just want the ones that are on my property. And
Mhm.
so can I just take a pile of them and wet the cardboard and put them on that? Would that get them to
Yeah,
grow?
that's one way to do it. I actually have also that in my backyard right now. So yeah, one thing you can do is stem butt cultivation. You could Google that if you want the full
What's it called?
description. But basically, if you pick a mushroom, it has to be saprotrophic. Mycorrhizal fungi you can't really cultivate. You can what we can do is like spread them, but they only grow with their partners. They're symbiotic partners, right? So there's ways you can make little spore slurries and things like that to kind of like just help them get an edge, help them establish themselves. You can inoculate with them. All of those mycorrhizal fungi products, there's those which are not always the best thing for your area. I really like to work with stuff. So, what I'm doing is I'm picking mycorrhizal mushrooms and then making spore slurries and then spreading those. But if you're wanting to cultivate mushrooms like to eat and you want to work, no?
Just to try to remediate so there's a lot of trash and heavy metals and crap in this forest.
Okay.
Really, really, really trying to just move the mushrooms around to get them to start taking care of some of this bad stuff for me.
Got it. And which kinds of mushrooms have you been working with so far?
Whatever's in the mulch pile, whatever's in my forest. So I have morels. I just let those grow. I've just been letting them grow so they'll spore more and give me more, but that's not working.
Yeah. I mean, morels are
So,
notoriously difficult to cultivate.
and then
It's
there's
been
that.
like this big mystery for a long time. And then a few years ago, these Dutch brothers kind of like cracked the code, but they're not sharing their methods with anybody.
Oh,
Yeah.
so I've tried all kinds of substrates like coffee grounds and mixed with eggshells, and I've been trying all this stuff to throw them
Yeah.
out, and I'm just not getting anywhere with it.
Maybe start with oyster mushrooms, which are really easy and have been really well studied
I don't
for
have
their
any of those on my property though. I want ones that come from my because then I
turkey
think then.
tails.
Say again?
You got turkey tails?
Yes, lots.
Okay. Turkey tails are everywhere, right?
Yes.
So yeah, with the turkey tail, I mean, one thing you can do, a lot of times people will take a tissue culture and then you go to liquid culture, you do a grain spawn, or you could do a petri dish to grain spawn to bulk up. It's like cultivation, there's a lot of steps involved to kind of bulk out that mycelium.
But I don't want
We're trying
rats.
to just kind of, you don't want rats. No. Um, yeah, it can be there it is a process. Mushroom cultivation can be done, if you're not attached to the results, you can just try to do the easy stuff. You can just put the mushrooms around where you want them to grow, put them on top where they'll drop their spores and just hope for the best. If you're really attached to the like getting a bunch of mycelium of a certain species growing, then you do have to do that whole mushroom cultivation process. And if you don't have your own lab, you don't have your own glove box, and you're not quite set up to do a whole mushroom cultivation thing, then maybe you could find somebody who is. Liquid culture is a lot easier and you don't need as much sterile equipment. I can show you guys what that looks like actually real quick if you want to see.
It looks like you're going into the forest to get it.
Sorry, I went into the vortex. I went into the forest to get this. I don't know if you can see. I think if I shine a light through it, you'll be able to see the mycelium in there better. So can you see that a little bit?
A little bit. The forest is in the way.
Forest keeps coming.
So
So
you
this
just
the
take the
cloud.
mushrooms and you throw them into the water.
a little
with
cloud.
what?
So yeah, so what you do for this, there's a special kind of jar that has what we call an airport lid. And this little part is a filter patch so that it can breathe and you know, have that air exchange. This is a little port where you can stick a syringe in and out. And what you do is you get some water, you get some honey, it has to be non-chlorinated water, and you pressure cook it so that you know, kill off any other competing microbes. And then you get a tissue culture. So you get like the inside of a mushroom. And it's actually, mushrooms are actually sterile inside. So you want like the inside. So you cut it open very carefully. You get a little chunk of the of that tissue, and then you put it into you get it on the tip of a syringe, and then you stick it in through that port. And you can do it like a few times to get a few in there, and then we've got our nice mycelium growing in here. So this
So are
is
you using a fruiting
Crepidotus
body?
mollis, which is a species growing around my house that I'm going to use for my experiment.
So what part of the mushroom are you using? The fruiting body?
The fruiting body, yeah. So yeah, you take the actual mushroom and you slice it in half, and
Okay.
then you get like the meaty part that's like
Yeah, yeah,
between
yeah. I know what you're
the
talking about.
gills and the top, you know.
Are
So
you
yeah,
making
I
them?
recommend, do I have it here with me? Where is it? There's a book I recommend called DIY Mushroom Cultivation by Willoughby Arevalo. I'll put the name in the
Oh, that would be helpful. Thanks.
yeah.
Perfect. That was going to be my follow-up, is if there was some literature for Alex to
Thank
continue learning. And I'd
I also
imagine
do mushroom cultivation classes if anybody ever wants. And I like to specialize in, you know, mushroom cultivation for restoration and doing outdoor stuff and not just the sterile stuff. So happy to talk about that more.
And you got that, you gave the contact info, so I will get that information from you.
Cool. Yeah,
Thank you, thank you, thank
of course.
and I'd imagine too, identifying which mushrooms and then what they need. Some grow in wood chip piles, some grow on trees that in grass, yada, poop. The variety of likes might also help Alex with your moving them around. Maybe they don't have the right food, right? Or you put them in the wrong place for their needs.
Apparently that's what's happening. Oh.
Maya,
Yeah, so it's a good to observe like what they're growing on in the wild too, you know, and make sure that they have that same food source.
going back to your inoculating for restoration, I know you mentioned the compost piles. Is that typically how you culture those native species for inoculation?
Well, I just did it this one time.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if I can say typically yet, but I'm a big fan of the methodology. I think it's really cool. And I really like that it kind of sets you up for success with having the right diversity and a you know, balanced composition of microbes that are non-pathogenic. So yeah, I can put in some more info about that. It's the soil food web school approach. And there's Dr. Elaine Ingham, who has led that school and a lot of that research.
Okay.
And then I also like Compost Academy, Keisha and Casey, and they also have a company called Catalyst Biomimets. They're over in Butte County, so it's a little bit far for you guys, but they make really, really high quality compost using this method. So you can also just buy their compost.
What was the name? Are you putting that in the chat?
Yeah.
Food web? Thanks.
And Eugene, I know we don't normally share the chat when we share the recording and email participants, but I was thinking might be good to pull some of these pieces, the titles and whatnot. When we log off, I think it sends you, it might send me to, it sends the host the chat. So perhaps we can grab some of those pieces for the follow-up email. There's two more questions. Time of year for deploying the wattles might affect the effectiveness, since drier conditions make the fungal a little slow to act in dormant.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, right? Because you want to get them in before the rains, but if it's too far before the rains, the mycelium will dry out, right? Or in watering right after a fire, when a lot of times you've lost a lot of that infrastructure, can be really tricky. Hoses melt, right? Pipes melt. So, yeah, it's part of dealing with that. But typically you would do it, in the fall before the rains.
Okay.
I don't worry too much about it being too cold. All that will mean is that the mycelium will grow slower.
Okay.
If it's like freezing temperatures, that's not great for them. Yeah. But it doesn't
Reflecting
always
back,
kill them. It often just slows them down quite a bit.
okay. Reflecting back on those heavy metals, Marcy is also wondering, how long do you need to wait after a fire that it's safe to eat those fungi in the area, like morels?
Forever, until you've dealt with the contamination. It's not a time thing. It's a like, have you done the cleanup thing? Because heavy metals will stick around for a long time. I mean, there are natural processes that will happen that may, or, depending on what happens with the land over time, if there's a bunch of really great biology that comes in and, is a part of that landscape over time, maybe it'll be safer. But if there's a lot of heavy metals, they're going to stick around.
And then I see a lot of thank yous. Quite a few folks had to log off. Sometimes folks will catch the last 15 minutes of the question and answer on the recording. So thank you so much for sticking around late past the 7:30 mark to finish answering all these questions. And just making sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah.
This is so fun. What a cool group you guys have here.
Thank you so much, Maya. And so we send out this recording to all the registrants, but in a few months, and I believe you asked as well for the link, and the link, it's unlisted, so anyone with the link will be able to watch the video. And then in a few months, we open it up public on our Land Steward YouTube page, so it'll even continue its reach
Awesome.
months to come. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, it'll be nice to give to my my interns and other students that I work with. That'd be great.
It's the gift that keeps on coming.
Yeah, they're unpaid interns, so I always try to give them things whenever I can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Nicole, and great to meet you, Eugene and Alex and Marcy.
Thank you, Maya. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks for